I came home that Saturday morning with a trunk full of groceries and zero expectations for drama. Just coffee, maybe a lazy afternoon. You know, the kind of quiet that makes you forget the world exists for a minute. And then I turned onto my gravel drive and just stopped. There was a truck, not just parked there, not slightly over the line like someone who made a dumb mistake. No, this thing was planted sideways across my driveway like it had a personal vendetta against me. Big, glossy black pickup, the kind that screams, "I don't apologize," blocking the entire entrance like it owned the place. And I sat there for a second, engine still running, just staring at it, trying to process the audacity. Like maybe I was missing something obvious. Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe there was some emergency. Maybe. Then I saw the sign. Laminated. Of course it was laminated. Taped right to the windshield, bright and official looking, like that somehow made it legitimate. Event parking, temporary use. Temporary use of my driveway. Now, here's the thing you need to understand about where I live. My place sits just outside this gated subdivision called Ridgeview Estates. Brick walls, keypad entry, HOA rules longer than a CVS receipt. But my property? It predates all of that. My dad bought this land decades ago, back when the only association around here was whoever showed up to help you fix a fence. He used to say, "That gate keeps them in, not me out." And honestly, I never had a problem with them. We coexisted. They had their manicured lawns and holiday newsletters. I had my 2 acres, my tools, and my peace. Until that morning. Because apparently, Ridgeview had decided that temporary use extended beyond their gates and into my life. I pulled up to the edge of my own driveway, still blocked, and just sat there with my blinker ticking like a metronome for irritation. I checked the address on the sign. Yep, it listed the HOA office number. No apology, no contact name, no warning, just assumption. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I called the number. It rang twice. And then she answered. Bright, cheerful, like she was greeting someone at a brunch. Ridgeview Estates. "This is Melanie speaking." Melanie. Of course her name was Melanie. I kept my voice calm, explained the situation. "Hey, I'm calling about the truck blocking my driveway just outside your north gate." There was a pause. Not confusion, recognition. "Oh, yes, that's part of our annual art festival setup," she said, like she was telling me about a bake sale. I blinked. Right. Well, it's blocking access to my property. And this is where things shifted. Because instead of concern, or even basic courtesy, she gave me this laugh. Not loud, not mean on the surface, but the kind that carries just enough condescension to let you know exactly where you stand. "Oh, don't worry," she said. "We'll have it moved in a few days once the event is over." A few days. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear for a second, like maybe I misheard that, then brought it back. "No, I need it moved today. That's my driveway." Another pause. Then the tone changed again, still sweet, but now it had that edge, like sugar coating over steel. "Well," she said, "you'll just have to park on the street like everyone else." Like everyone else. Now that phrase stuck with me. Not because it was practical, but because it revealed the whole mindset. In her world, I wasn't a homeowner with property rights. I was just an inconvenience outside their system. Not part of the HOA, not part of their rules, not part of their consideration. I started to respond, but she cut me off. "We're very busy preparing for the event, sir. Thank you for your patience." Click. She hung up, and I just sat there. Engine idling. Groceries warming in the back seat. A stranger's truck blocking my driveway like it had every right to be there. And for a moment, I considered just letting it go. Parking on the road. Carrying everything in. Dealing with it later. That's what most people would do, right? Avoid conflict. Keep the peace. Don't escalate. But here's the thing. Peace only works when both sides respect it. And in that moment, it was very clear they didn't. So I turned off the engine, stepped out, and walked up to the truck. Big tires, deep treads, spotless paint. This thing hadn't seen a hard day in its life. Probably belonged to someone who thought, off-road, meant driving over a curb at Starbucks. I circled it once, slow, hands in my pockets, just taking it in, and that's when something clicked in the back of my mind. Not anger. Not exactly. Recognition. Because I'd seen situations like this before, not with HOAs, but in business. People testing boundaries, assuming you won't push back, betting on your inconvenience outweighing your willingness to act. And if you don't respond, They keep going. I walked back toward my garage, still thinking, replaying the call in my head, that little laugh, that like everyone else, that casual dismissal. And then I remembered something. Something I hadn't touched in years. Back when I used to run a small landscaping side business, I kept supplies for soil treatment. Nothing fancy, just practical stuff. And sitting on a shelf in the corner of my garage were a few old boxes, gypsum, bentonite clay, and a bag of grass seed. Now on their own, completely harmless. Useful even. But together, well, together they do something interesting. I stood there for a moment, looking at those boxes, and I could feel the idea forming. Not rushed, not emotional, just deliberate. The kind of solution that doesn't break rules, but definitely bends expectations. Because if they were going to treat my driveway like part of their event setup, then I was going to treat it like my project. And I had all the materials I needed. I grabbed the hose first, dragging it across the yard, the rubber scraping lightly over gravel. Then I set the boxes down near the entrance, right where the truck's tires met my driveway. The sun was just high enough to cast clean shadows, the kind of quiet morning that makes everything feel slower, calmer. Almost like the world was giving me time to think this through. And I did. One last time. Because once I started, there was no pretending it was an accident. This would be intentional, measured, and very, very inconvenient for the right people. I popped open the first box, the powder fine and pale, catching the light as I sprinkled it across the ground. Then the clay, darker, heavier, followed by the seed, layer by layer, building something that looked innocent enough unless you knew exactly what it would become. And as I worked, I couldn't help but smile just a little, not out of spite, not really, but because for the first time since that phone call, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. Now let me pause the story for a second, because this right here, this is where things get interesting, not just emotionally, but legally and psychologically too. According to standard procedure, HOAs only have authority within the boundaries of their own governed properties, meaning if your house isn't part of that association, their rules don't magically apply to you just because they feel like expanding their footprint for a weekend event. That temporary use sign, it might look official, but outside their jurisdiction, it's basically just laminated confidence. From a legal perspective, what they did, blocking a private driveway without permission, that's not just rude. That can qualify as trespassing or even unlawful obstruction of access. And here's the catch. They were betting on something. This is a psychological trap. They assumed inconvenience would outweigh confrontation. Most people, when faced with a situation like that, will choose the path of least resistance, park somewhere else, deal with it later, avoid escalation. HOAs, especially the more aggressive ones, sometimes operate on that exact assumption, that their perceived authority will go unchallenged. And that's where the balance shifts. Because the moment someone understands the actual boundaries, legal and psychological, they stop reacting and start responding with intent. And once you do that, the whole dynamic changes. So yeah, once that switch flipped in my head, everything slowed down in a weird way, like I wasn't just some guy reacting anymore. I was running a process. No yelling, no notes on windshields, no calling back to argue. Just execution. I laid down that mix slowly, almost methodically, like I was back on a job site. First the gypsum, light dusting, then the bentonite, thicker, heavier, something that could hold moisture like a sponge that never learned when to let go. And then the grass seed on top, because why not? Let's make it look like I'm doing yard work instead of setting a trap that was technically just landscaping. Then came the water. I turned the hose on low at first, letting it soak in gradually, watching the ground darken, soften, shift, and after a few minutes, it started doing exactly what I knew it would do. The surface lost its firmness, the gravel began to sink just slightly, and that mixture, man, it turned into this thick, sticky slurry that didn't just sit there, it moved. It crept. It slid under the tires, clung to the edges, filled in the gaps like it had a purpose. And I just stood there, adjusting the spray, making sure it reached the right spots, making sure the base around each tire got saturated enough that when weight shifted, it wouldn't go anywhere. I wasn't damaging the truck. Not directly. I was just making sure the ground it depended on stopped cooperating. About an hour in, the sun climbed higher, the air warmed up, and that mixture started to settle into something heavier, denser. Not quite solid, not liquid either, Just that perfect in-between that makes traction a suggestion instead of a guarantee. I shut off the hose, coiled it back halfway, leaned against it, and just looked at the setup. Quiet. Still. Waiting. And right on cue. Here she came. Melanie. I heard her before I saw her. The quick, irritated clicking of heels on pavement, completely out of place on a gravel road. And when she rounded the corner, she looked exactly how you'd expect. Sunglasses, clipboard, posture like she owned not just the neighborhood, but the air above it. Except the moment she stepped off the pavement and onto my driveway, that confidence slipped. Literally. Her heels sank just enough into the softened ground that she had to catch herself, arms flaring out for balance. And that was the first crack. What is this? She snapped, looking down, then up at me, then at the truck. What have you done to our event vehicle? Our. I almost laughed, but kept it together. I shifted my weight, still leaning on the hose, completely relaxed, just improving my driveway. She stared at me like I'd just spoken another language. This is not funny. That truck needs to be moved immediately. Well, I said, tilting my head slightly. You mentioned a few days, right? That landed. Her jaw tightened, and for a second, the mask dropped. No more cheerful HOA tone, just raw irritation. You are interfering with a scheduled community event. I shrugged. On my property. She took a step forward. Another mistake. Her heels sinking again, this time deeper, and she let out a sharp breath, clearly not used to terrain that didn't cooperate with her. I will call the authorities, she said, voice sharp, controlled but barely. I nodded. You should. And that threw her. Because she expected resistance, maybe panic, maybe backpedaling, not agreement. She hesitated, then turned, carefully picking her way back to solid ground, pulling out her phone as she went. And just like that, we escalated. The deputy showed up about 45 minutes later, county sheriff, older guy, the kind who's seen enough nonsense to recognize it on sight. He stepped out of his cruiser, took one look at the situation, the truck, the mud, Melanie standing there trying very hard not to look like she'd lost control, and then he walked over to me. Afternoon, he said. Afternoon. He gestured around. This your property? Yeah. He nodded once, slow, like he'd already reached a conclusion. Then he turned slightly, looking back at the truck, then at Melanie. Anyone give you permission to park here? He asked her. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then tried again. We have an event. He raised a hand, not aggressive, just enough to stop the explanation. That wasn't the question. Silence. And there it was, the moment everything shifted. Because authority, real authority, not laminated, not self-appointed, doesn't need to raise its voice. It just clarifies reality. No, she admitted, tight, controlled. He nodded again, then looked back at me. You've damaged the vehicle? I shook my head. No, sir. Just working on my driveway. He looked down at the ground, scuffed it lightly with his boot, felt the give, the texture, the way it held. Then straightened up. Nothing illegal here, he said simply. And that was it. No lecture. No warning. No paperwork. Just confirmation. He tipped his hat slightly, got back in his cruiser, and drove off, leaving Melanie standing there in heels that had no business being anywhere near that situation. She didn't say anything else. Just turned and walked away. Carefully this time. Now here's where it gets good. Because the next morning, reality set in for someone else. The truck's actual owner showed up. I heard the engine before I saw him, that low rumble turning into a confused idle. Then the driver's door opened, and this guy, mid-40s, polo shirt, sunglasses, stepped out, looked at his truck, then at the ground, then back at the truck like it had personally betrayed him. He got in, turned the wheel slightly, tapped the gas. Nothing. Tried again, more pressure this time. The tires spun, and that slurry? It did exactly what it was designed to do. It clung, it resisted, it refused to release. The treads filled instantly, turning those big, expensive tires into smooth, useless cylinders. He hit the gas harder. Mistake. Mud sprayed up in thick arcs, splattering across the sides of that pristine black paint, up into the wheel wells, even onto the side mirrors. He stopped, sat there for a second, then opened the door and stepped out, right into it. His shoes sank, slid, and he had that half second of panic where his body realized before his brain did that gravity was about to win. He caught himself, barely, but not without getting a nice streak of that same mud across his pant leg. And that's when the yelling started. Not at me, not yet, but at the situation, at the air, at whatever version of reality he thought he was supposed to be living in that didn't include this. By then, a couple of residents had wandered over from the subdivision, drawn by the noise, phones already out, whispering, pointing, and somewhere in the background, I could hear notifications going off. Later, I found out why. The Ridgeview HOA Facebook group was lighting up. Whose truck is stuck by the north gate? Is this going to affect parking for the art show? Why is there mud everywhere? No answers. Just confusion. And me? I stayed quiet. Every few hours, I'd walk out, check the ground, give it a light misting. Nothing excessive, just enough to keep that consistency right where I wanted it. Not dry enough to crack, not wet enough to wash away. Just perfectly inconvenient. Day 2 came and went. More attempts. More spinning. More frustration. At one point, someone tried to lay down boards for traction, didn't work. The boards sank, shifted, got swallowed just like everything else. By day 3, they gave up on doing it themselves. Tow truck showed up early, big rig, heavy winch, the kind that usually makes problems disappear. Not this time. The operator stepped out, took one look, and just shook his head like he'd seen this kind of mess before and already knew it wasn't going to be quick. It took him nearly an hour just to dig around the tires, clearing enough of that hardened, sticky mix to get chains hooked properly. Every pull of the winch strained, the truck resisting like it had grown roots overnight. When it finally came free, it didn't glide out, it tore out. Deep ruts carved into my driveway, chunks of that mixture pulling up with the tires, leaving behind a mess that was very clearly going to need repair. And that was the moment they came back. Melanie again, but different this time. No heels, flats, practical, and a folder in her hands. She walked up slower, more careful, not just because of the ground, but because the dynamic had changed. Completely. We'd like to resolve this, she said, no smile this time, no tone, just direct. I nodded. I figured. She opened the folder, pulled out a document. We're prepared to offer compensation for the damage to your driveway. $1,200, she said, like it cost her something to say it out loud. And a written agreement that no vehicles associated with Ridgeview Estates will be parked on your property again. Now, that was good, but not complete. I took the paper, glanced at it, then looked back up at her. Add a clause. She blinked. What kind of clause? $500 per day, I said, calm, steady, for any future violation. There was a pause, a real one, because now she had to decide, fight this, drag it out, risk more, or close it clean. She exhaled slowly, nodded once. Fine. She wrote it in. Signed. I signed. And just like that, it was over. That evening, I got to work for real this time, leveled the ruts, brought in fresh gravel, restored the driveway properly. No tricks, no strategy, just fixing what needed fixing. And back in the garage, those boxes of gypsum and clay? Still there. Still unopened. Just in case. So yeah, that's how it ended. No shouting match. No courtroom drama. No viral confrontation video. Just a quiet little lesson in boundaries, written in mud and signed on paper. And the funny part is, it never really felt like revenge to me. Not the dramatic kind, anyway. It felt more like correction. Because here's the thing. What happened out there wasn't just about a truck blocking a driveway. It was about assumptions. About one group of people believing their system, their rules, their event, somehow extended beyond the limits of where it actually applied. And more importantly, it was about them assuming nobody would push back. The lesson here is, most conflicts like this aren't random. They're patterns. HOAs, organizations, even individuals, they operate based on what has worked before. If they've gotten away with small oversteps in the past, they start believing those oversteps are normal. Then they get bigger, then bolder, until one day, they run into someone who understands the line and decides not to move it. And that's where things shift. From a legal perspective, nothing I did was extraordinary. I didn't tow the truck, didn't damage it, didn't escalate into something reckless. I stayed on my property, used materials I already owned, and let the situation play out within the boundaries of what I was allowed to do. That's important, because once you step outside that line, even if you're in the right, you hand control back to the other side. And trust me, they're usually waiting for that. This is a psychological trap a lot of people fall into. You get pushed, you get frustrated, and then you react emotionally instead of strategically. You raise your voice, you make threats, you do something impulsive, and suddenly, the story isn't about what was done to you anymore. It's about how you responded. And that's a losing position. What worked here wasn't aggression, it was patience. It was understanding that inconvenience, when applied correctly, can be more persuasive than confrontation. Nobody likes to admit it, but time, discomfort, and public attention, those are powerful motivators. That truck sitting there for 3 days, that wasn't just a logistical problem. It was a visible reminder to everyone in that neighborhood that something had gone wrong. And visibility creates pressure, especially in communities like that, where image matters, where people pay for consistency, control, predictability. The last thing they want is a situation that looks messy, unresolved, or out of their control. So they fix it quickly and on terms they might not have considered before. Now, does that mean this approach works every time? No. Context matters. Laws vary. People react differently. But the principle, that's consistent. Understand your position. Stay within your rights. And don't rush your response just because someone else is rushing you. Because pressure goes both ways. Also, and this is important, none of this would have happened if there had been a simple conversation up front. A knock on the door. Hey, we're hosting an event. Would you mind if? That's all it takes sometimes. Respect isn't complicated. But when respect gets replaced with entitlement, well, things tend to get a little muddy. And maybe that's the bigger takeaway here. Not every problem needs a dramatic solution, but every boundary needs to be clear. Because the moment you let one slide, even a small one, you're teaching people how to treat you. And once that pattern sets in, it's a lot harder to break. So yeah, next time you find yourself dealing with someone who thinks your space, your time, or your rights are optional, don't just react. Pause. Think. Figure out where the real leverage is. Because it's not always where you expect. And sometimes, it's sitting on a shelf in your garage. Now I'm curious, what would you have done in that situation? Would you have just parked on the street and waited it out? Or handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And if you want more stories like this, real situations, real decisions, and the kind of outcomes people don't usually talk about, go ahead and hit subscribe. Because trust me, this wasn't the only time someone underestimated where the line was.